Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. My name is Graham Carr. I'm the Vice President for Research and Graduate Studies here at Concordia University, and it's truly a pleasure to welcome you for this evening's Thinking Out Loud event as part of Concordia's Ideas Festival. And it's particularly a pleasure this evening to be able to host this event in collaboration with the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, also under the auspices of their immensely successful series entitled Big Thinking. I want to thank our Alumni Association at Concordia for their generous and ongoing support of this series. The goals of Big Thinking and Thinking Out Loud are symmetrical and complementary. In each case, the aim is to feature scholars and public figures in public settings, lectures, conversations, where they can discuss research and present ideas about issues and topics that matter to the society in which we live. And tonight's event is no different. Even casual observers know that there are big changes happening in the world of higher education globally, both in terms of the reach that universities have, the funding of universities, and the content of the programs that we offer to our students. There are equally a lot of legitimate concerns and pressures about where priorities should be placed in higher education for the 21st century. Many people believe that there should be a substantial investment in the so-called STEM disciplines. Others worry about how universities prepare graduates for the 21st century workforce. And inevitably, these discussions are prompting reflection on the role of the liberal arts, the role that the liberal arts has traditionally played, the role that the liberal arts should play within society and universities going forward. And this evening, we're extremely fortunate to have Joseph Boyden with us tonight to share his thoughts on the importance of liberal arts education and how it can and should be related to the changing context in which we live. Now, one of the beauties of liberal arts education typically has been its ability to provide a space for thoughtful, extended, engaging conversations. And so the conversational format for this evening's event fits that description perfectly. But without further ado, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our conversationalists for this evening. Concordia's Dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts, Rebecca Duclos. From our Department of English, Professor Jill Didur. And back to Thinking Out Loud by popular demand, the author, Joseph Boyden. Enjoy the evening.
Super. All right, well, thank you everybody for being here. It's a real treat, especially for Jill and I, to have Joseph in the middle, a Joseph sandwich. And in fact, we started the conversation about liberal arts, a half an hour ago when we first met. And one of the little discoveries that we made was that Joseph's partner used to be a contortionist and a trapeze artist, and it made me think about sort of early Aristotelian ideas around liberal arts or liberal sciences, and one of the things he talks about is actually the training of the body as being part of that connection with the mind and with the emotions and so forth. And I was wondering, maybe that's where we could start, is how do we think about the whole person when we're thinking in terms of liberal arts?
I think that's exactly what a liberal arts degree is this idea of a completeness. I've thought about the liberal arts, I realized consciously in a long time. I graduated many years ago, but then I realized, knowing I was coming here, I was rolling it over in my head for a long time, and I'm always thinking about it. I'm always thinking about what makes the full person, what makes a person that you click with, makes you want to click with them. And it's the idea that they are not just driven in one way. We all love a driven person. But the people I'm most attracted to and interested in are the ones who have a depth and a variety of interests. I was thinking, would a liberal, in the United States, where I'm living most of the year, what's going on now is insane with the politics and that. And I was like, would a liberal, who would vote for Trump? Certainly not somebody with a liberal arts degree kind of thing. And then I was like, okay, well, I like that. Why am I thinking this? What makes me say that? How can I prove that? And I can't, but I can certainly understand, a depth of experience and wanting to cast a wide net is the kind of idea in some ways of a liberal arts degree. And that means emotionally, physically even, you don't think about university and physical but that's we forget that we are complete beings, whole beings that crave all of, not just the one, but many.
Yeah, and exist in all of these realms simultaneously. And again, another part of the conversation was with Jill, who's just returned from Costa Rica. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your 13-year-old daughter, who was, on the one hand, bird watching and bringing forth her ornithological knowledge, but in order to do that, you were describing the way that she had to use visual acuity in terms of identifying the birds, an entire acoustic environment that she was also snapping into. I mean, this notion that, as Joseph was saying, we sort of have to keep this breadth and this depth simultaneously. And how does one train for that? How does one prepare one's mind, one's body, one's ears, one's eyes, one's intellect for these kinds of moments when they all have to come into play?
Well, there's a real need for the flexibility, both, we were talking about bodies earlier, but the flexibility of mind. And I think it's that kind of training that liberal arts or humanities approaches to education can cultivate in students. And it's quite interesting because in the midst of all of the bird watching and hiking that we were doing, my daughter's at the age where she's wondering, what should she be doing for her future in terms of her education. And I was actually giving her a kind of liberal arts pitch, to be honest. Despite the anxieties that parents have about, pushing their children towards programs where they'll, learn a job-ready skill, I guess, as it's described these days. I was explaining to her that, we don't know what the job market's going to look like by the time she's at the stage of looking for a full-time, long-term position, and so she wants to be able to, learn as much as she can about a variety of different things. So she discovers what really motivates her to take her studies seriously and take things in new directions. Marilyn Robinson has an interesting article in this month's Harper's Magazine, where she talks about, really she's making an argument for the value of liberal arts education, despite, again, this push towards sort of practical training that is dominating a lot of discussion in education circles these days.
In a way that cuts to the heart of this question is, why do you go to university?
Right.
And in the United States as well, I speak from the perspective because I've lived there for so long. It used to be simple. There was college and university. College was much more technical, and university was for other. But why does one choose to go to university these days? Is it for a job, or is it for what it used to be? The old days that we speak about. Is it to make a better person and to understand the world better, and then to understand where you're going to go in that world. I think it's really become a fast track. What are you going to do from high school? You should know what you're going to do. Please, if I was there.
I know. And it's interesting. I am trained, I guess you could say, in liberal arts and humanities, but I look after a faculty of fine art now, and it's even interesting that we make distinctions between liberal arts, fine arts, applied arts, performing arts, that we actually have to continue to slice up that pie. But in a number of conversations that I've been having over the past few years, there seems to be another trend that is coming up, which is deschooling. So not even thinking about the formal structures of academia, but many young people thinking, not only do I not want to pay for an education, but do I really need to have somebody to tell me how to educate myself? So this could be an interesting new change, also to see what a kind of autodidact-based education, self-education might look like.
Well, I was wondering about this recent discussion within Concordia in terms of the idea of connecting educational experiences to community-based experiences. And so in terms of my own research, I'm getting involved in projects that connect me to the community, to people who are knowledgeable about things that I want to learn more about and integrate into my research. Yeah. So I think there's a kind of hybrid world that is emerging within, well, certainly Concordia and other institutions that are I think in urban centers, where you have access to knowledgeable people in different areas and walks of life within the community that you can bring into the classroom or integrate into your research practice and your educational experiences. And I think there's that kind of liminal space now that is much more legitimate in the university than it was in the past.
Certainly so.
And I think that's I think that's understandably attractive to students because it allows them to think about immediately as they are learning, how does what I'm doing here at the university connect to the world outside of the university.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's not just hybrid anymore, it's hyper-hybrid. Look at how quickly things are changing as well. You know, the career you might think you're aiming for in your first year of university might not even exist anymore in the sense that you thought it was going to 4 years later. And you know, my father was a doctor, my mom was a teacher. I'm one of 11 kids, so I came from a family where everyone, you know, was involved in one way or the other in education and in healing, and I think and in good medicine, and I think that they're one and the same in so many ways. You know, 7 older sisters, all of them teachers.
Wow.
2 younger brothers, they went the other route. They're firefighters, big tough guys. And the oldest brother, who's the shame of the family, he's a lawyer. And we went in all these different directions. I was the only boy to choose education because I always knew. I don't know if you're. I don't think it's fair to say, but for me, I think the idea of a liberal arts education was just a given. It was the idea that I don't know exactly what my life, where it's going to take me, but I do know a few things about what I want to do. I want to live well, and I want a job, I want a career that you know the two can feed off of each other, and so and my family really pushed us to do that. You know, my oldest brother would tease me, "Oh, you're taking a liberal arts education. You know, how many classes?" And he used to even say, "Underwater basket weaving are you taking this semester?" kind of that kind of, you know, looking down on this kind of education, and I'd always laugh it off, and knowing, you know, this is a world where I'm not going to be tied down to, you know, in grade 12, it was grade 13 at the time. I'm going to say what I'm going to be the rest of my life. It's this, I know I want to teach, I know I want to write in some capacity, I know I want to do a number of different things, and how do I find that and how do I do that?
Right.
And that's why this kind of, what did you call it,
Deschooling.
Deschooling. It sounds like something you take at Trump University, actually, but but it's you know, it's that idea of like that freedom to
serpentine around.
To move around and to, you know, I'm very much a romantic when it comes to that. You know, the whole Jack Kerouac school of thought where I hit the road and went to graduate school on a motorcycle with what I could carry in my saddlebags, literally, and drove 2,000 kilometers, left a family, and said, you know, and my family was just like, "Oh my God, Joseph, you're screwed now."
Doing it again.
And I was, you know, in so many ways, you know. But this is what it is. It's taking a chance. It's rolling the dice in some ways, a liberal arts education, you know, and.
Well, I think it's interesting because we're all, you know, relatively of the same generation, I think, and I think are people who went to the university at a time when sort of liberal arts education was, you know, had become radically democratized, so that you know, people who, I think to some extent, a liberal arts education, the first half of the century was much more of an elite opportunity, and post-war, 60s and certainly in the 70s, and moving into the 80s, it became something where many people who would normally in the past not really considered having a liberal arts education had that opportunity. And so I think that's really transformed how we understand liberal arts education. It brought a different constituency into the university, and those students also, I think, demanded a kind of diversification of the curriculum in the liberal arts degree program.
Right.
So when I was first doing my undergraduate degree at Queen's University, which was largely sort of built around a liberal arts training, there weren't courses in what I later came to specialize in, which is sort of post-colonial studies.
Right, what happened in the 80s.
And since that time, of course, these are the kinds of courses that students are, clamoring to get into. And we have, for example, numerous post-colonial studies courses, First Nations literature in our department. And right now, actually, there's a lot of universities that are sort of looking at, integrating First Nations curriculum in the wake of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that's becoming a big discussion.
And that's, I think, what's going to guide universities, I hope, and they hear this, is that they have to be willing to move and move quickly and be very, be able to acclimate very quickly to what the current situation is demanding, and if a university can't, that university is going to suffer for it. And I think, in liberal arts, in a way, is that ability to, okay, I can move around, I can jump from here to here to here. We were talking earlier about that was it the Forbes article or a New York Times article?
There is a
There's
Forbes
a bunch
article,
of them.
About liberal arts graduates being important employees within the tech industry in California in particular, being the employees who are sort of driving innovation in ways that, again, you might not anticipate given the rhetoric around what does one do with a liberal arts or humanities degree?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, just to pick up on what you were talking about, Jill, of this, our generation sort of moving through. I think even going back further, I was thinking about being raised essentially in the 70s, where I don't know if you had the same experience, but my elementary school was completely without walls. So it was the first open classroom experimentations. In our 5th grade, we dropped all of the subjects and instead put on an entire production for 3 months where we had to.
I went to Catholic school. It's not like that at all.
You should have come to my school. We had way more fun than the Catholic schools did. But it was extraordinary because we learned math by building. We had to build our own sets. We had to draw on plans. We did all the research for the narratives. We had to write our own scripts. We had to choreograph our own performances. We had to write our own music. And so it was this sort of whole, again, to return to this sort of whole person experience. And there were no names for it. It wasn't called project-based education at that point. It wasn't. It was just sort of what we did, and there was this kind of open experimentation that, at a very early age, normalized this ability to slide back and forth and to actually carry on numerous roles simultaneously, and to also seek out expertise from others when you needed it, not because a classroom assignment told you to do this, but because you needed to, get that set built by next Tuesday. So I wondered if either of you either had sort of radical educational experiences early on, or if there was a mentor in your life, or what triggered, if looking back, what might have triggered for you a sort of a more experimental attitude towards your education?
I totally have one. I don't know about you.
Go.
But like I was saying, I went to a Blessed Trinity Catholic school in Willowdale, Ontario, and my mother taught there, so I couldn't get away with anything. It sucked. But and it was it was very formulated, regulated. I wish I'd had the experience. For example, you said about the math. I would not have failed grade 9 math if I had had the experience you had in the earlier grades. Yeah. This understanding, like this not being able to connect. My brain was not able to connect in that intellectual way with so much of math. And if I had actually had the hands-on experience, I know I would have. But the turning point for me was I ended up going from, funneled. I was the third youngest of all these kids, so you get funneled through what, it's tradition. My oldest brother went to Bray Buff High School, so I had to go. And I hated it. It was just so structured and formal. And Jesuits, now I look back, and Jesuits, amazing teachers, but at the time I was not clicking with them, to the point where I cut my hair in a mohawk to challenge them and get kicked out. And I was sent to, as a troubled teen, to an alternative school for my last couple of years of high school. And that's the world opened up suddenly. Suddenly, education was not a burden. Getting up in the morning to go to class was no longer a burden. Taking classes I never thought I would want to was no longer scary. It was scary, but it was a challenge. And it was called the Alternative Independent Study Program in Toronto. And it changed my whole view. I would have dropped out of school. I would have not gone on at all without having found that little tiny school. Keanu Reeves went to it.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was really funny. Not for very long, but we'd play hockey once in a while. It was like a weird school. It just gathered all these weird, strange people from all over the place who just weren't fitting into a classic system.
Well, I should say the other half of my story was, although we were all in 5th grade, the people who mentored us were not just our teachers, but a group of 20 students from an alternative performing arts high school that was somewhere else in the state. And they builded with our families, so we had people living with us and staying with us. So this complete moment. And this alternative school was particularly for kids who had dropped out of the mainstream. And so we were being mentored by the kids who got kicked out of school, which was even more enlightening for us because they would tell us their stories and how they turned themselves around and managed to have this extraordinary life. And they were, I know it sounds almost cliche, of course it does now, but they were risk takers and they were kind of wild and I think.
But cared, that else they wouldn't be doing it.
And they'd sort of been to the other side and.
Some of the early education experiences you're describing remind me of my own sort of middle school 7, 8. Also, though, my family moved into the countryside when I hit high school, which was really outside of Oakville. And so that resulted in a lot of busing and actually a lot of time spent on your own. And so you really had to find ways to kind of entertain yourself. And that's where I think I got into sort of pursuing my own interests simply because, you're not in the city, you can't just, run out to the mall quite as, even though you might want to. But it's interesting, again, my own children are in an alternative school right now, which is not really the norm in Quebec. And in fact, I find the regular school system in Quebec quite structured in a way that's unfamiliar to me. But when I do spend time in the alternative school, what strikes me as quite interesting is that the self-directed learning that is sort of at the core of that kind of pedagogical approach reminds me quite a bit of the graduate or the undergraduate classroom, where the professor's there to try and get a sense from the students, well, what is it that interests you about this material? And how can I help you further your understanding of that and to learn more about it. So that kind of, to a certain extent, liberal arts education has relied on a kind of smaller classroom setting where there's space for dialogue. And I really think that that kind of freedom to pursue what matters to you about the material that you're engaging with is somewhat at the core of the liberal arts experience, but at the same time having faculty members that are experts in areas who can say, oh, well, if you're interested in this, then you really should be reading this book, or you should be taking that class because that person knows a lot about that area.
Right.
That's it in a nutshell, especially with my experience in that high school that changed my life. It changed my life. It put me in a direction where suddenly I realized it really was much like going to university. The teachers, if you didn't show up, they were like, oh, shame. You're not going to pass, but and you're suddenly like, oh, wait a second, this is a different way. But it also, in a lot of ways, it allowed you to see the world through your lens of perception rather than a lens being forced on you, if you know what I mean. And I think in some ways that's a liberal arts education where you're allowed to gather information and digest it and then use it to see the world in a way that opens up rather than being forced to wear these glasses, these bifocals that you can't see the world through properly,
Or to even learn how to articulate the fact that you might want to reject the education that's being given to you. And I think this is the criticality and And I think there's another aspect to this that, again, was very interesting. Just before I left the States to come back to Montreal, I was at the School of the Art Institute.
Whereabouts in the States?
The School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
In Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And there's a National Association of Schools of Art and Design, and they took it upon themselves in the past 2 years to actually try to put their fingers on what it is that somebody possesses when you have completed a degree in art and design and art-related scholarship. And some predictable things came up, expertise with innovation and improvisation, and the ability to think quickly on your feet, critical thinking, all those things. But one of the most interesting characteristics that I heard come out from that series of conversations was the ability to live with ambiguity. This is what they felt most defined a student who had gone through this experience. And I think you could say the same thing for liberal arts education. I think it is this capacity and this sort of confidence to live in a space where you're of unknowing at the same time.
And try to make some sense of that through your...
Or to live with the fact that you might not be able to make sense of it right away yet. Yeah.
And, in a lot of ways, I think the world obviously is so cliche, is becoming much more fast-paced every month, not every year, but every month. Things are changing so quickly. We're down to the 140 characters. If you can't get it down 140 characters, you're out of here. It's this idea of a lack of patience. But I think true education is all about the patience, right?
Slowness.
With me, I knew I was I'm going to do 4, 5, or 6 years of an undergrad degree, and then learn what the focus, learn to focus from there into what was really driving me to move forward as a young person, as a young adult, And then it's that idea of patience in a world that no longer really, really cares for patience. Everything has to be now. And this is why I think people struggle so hard and often with this idea of a liberal arts degree. What do you mean you don't know what you want to do with your life? You're 14. What are you thinking? It's and it's that kind of idea. It's still, the world is so quickly just changing.
I'm just thinking, because you've spent some time in the States as well, and talking to colleagues in the States about their experiences in the universities there. There's a real part of that anxiety, I think, for students comes from the cost of their education, and the feeling like if their education is going to result in the equivalent of a mortgage by the time they're finished, they want to feel as though they have a marketable skill. And Robinson's article in Harper's quite interesting, because she sort of names that this problem of having to put a value, an economic value on every skill that a student acquires at the university. Sort of reduces education to training as opposed to exploration and innovation. And
it becomes so instrumentalized that way.
We're quite lucky in Quebec in a sense that students have relatively low tuitions, but even still, many students are working part-time at Concordia in order to fund their studies and cover their living expenses. So there's always that pressure to balance. How am I going to be able to use this to support myself at the end of the day? But as we were speaking about in the green room before we came out, I think it is kind of a hidden secret that a humanities degree or a liberal arts degree actually trains you in certain ways to be, excellent communicator, critical thinker, writer, and that these are the kinds of skills that many businesses are looking for.
That are agile and that are portable and transferable and translational.
So it's something that I try to emphasize with students in our program. That I think there's that one of the things that I've heard that humanities students are not particularly good at is conveying to employers how those skills can be of value to them in the workplace. But as the Forbes article was suggesting, there's many employers, I think, who already know that. So this kind of rhetoric within the media that the liberal arts or the humanities degree doesn't have a kind of practical aspect or element to it is really, I think, quite misleading. So, I mean, yeah.
I love it. There's even a term for those skills, soft skills.
Yes.
Right. It's just,
You can communicate. You're a softie,
sweet.
and you know how to write. It's really soft, but it's good. We need those soft skills from you rather than my hard skills. You know, but it's true. It's the ability to be agile, and it's all about agility. And I think it's always been, but even more so. You know, I keep harping on this idea. This world, I'm blown away by how quickly things continue just to jump ahead at hyperspeed, and it's that ability, that agility to continue to be able to either avoid the punches or go with the flow, or to be the leader and push. You know,
get out ahead of them.
Is you know, that's what I found through throwing out that wide net of undergrad. You know, I took humanities and creative writing and philosophy. You know, I wanted to explore the world, and that's what my understanding was. My father was very much the classicist in terms of, you know, explore that world and get an understanding and build a foundation through a number, not just a foundation built on one thing. You know, if you can use multi-layers, it's only going to be stronger. And so that's what I tried to do. You know, as my mother then started groaning, "Are you ever going to graduate?" But she understood too. You know, being a teacher, it's not one size fits all by any means. That's what's the kind of beauty of a liberal arts degree.
And I think I'm interested too in seeing what happens in the next decade. One thing that I've heard that will be a radical, fascinating shift is that the demographic may in fact change dramatically, that there will be many people coming back to school in their 40s and 50s and 60s for undergraduate and graduate degrees. And so, you know, first I was thinking about that in terms of encouraging students to take time off between degrees and to take their time moving through degrees. But really the you know, wonderful outside edge of that is people who've been out of school for 10 or 20 years coming back, and what kind of a change that will bring when these life experiences and these narratives enter into the classroom. And it reminds me a bit, I guess, of you know, returning service women and men who would come back through GI Bills and so forth. And my father certainly benefited from that, but not because he was on the GI Bill himself. In fact, he finished high school and then was an actor and moved to Cambridge and Boston and New York and just acted every Shakespeare, did everything he could do, lived in a cold water flat for quite a while, and never got an undergraduate degree. Took advantage of the fact that there were people his age coming back after the war who were going for university educations and then came back to school. And I think that for people of his generation, it changed everything completely, that he was with a cohort of people who had had these intense life experiences. And as an actor, it furthered his education to sort of vicariously experience the kinds of real life situations that these people had that he'd been acting out on a stage in a Shakespearean manner. But so that, I don't know if you've heard that this might be an interesting change that's happening, or what your thoughts are about that.
I've heard rumblings of that for a long time, this idea, because what are the statistics now? They say that you're going to have 3 major careers over the course of your life.
I think it's up to 9 or
now,
something.
Yeah, it's probably, now it's 27.
Fast.
But yeah, it's this idea that you have to be able to continue to be agile and want to be agile, I think, is what it is. Needing to be and wanting to be is just as important. In
your creative writing teaching, Joseph, I was wondering, do you see that a sort of broader demographic of students interested in pursuing a creative writing degree? One of the things I was thinking about coming down here today is the popularity of book clubs, the popularity of creative writing workshops for people who aren't in the university but who want to be in a classroom in order to have a community of people and someone to give them expert feedback on what they're doing. And sometimes I think that if we're in an era where some students are pursuing more narrowly defined educational paths because of that economic anxiety that is looming when they're making their decisions, that eventually those people will sort of be drawn to these other kinds of experiences as a way of exploring other outlets
Yeah.
after they have that
That's right.
kind of early job-oriented
Right.
training.
Right.
But do you see that kind of broader demographic of students interested in creative writing?
I used to fret when I was teaching creative writing, especially on a graduate level, that how am I going to tell this student that your chances of living just by your writing alone are so minuscule, you'll crawl up into a ball and cry for the next 5 weeks, And then I realized I don't need to tell them that. People are here. The people who are serious about it, and all of them are, they're not in a graduate class otherwise, they know this, but it's not about the chances of that job. It's more about, this is what I need to do. I need to be fulfilled by this. I need to do this for very specific or many specific reasons. And so what I've found is, creative writing class, they're not going anywhere. MFA programs, I don't think. I think they're really, really strong across the board in terms of North America, in terms of enrollment alone. With the chances of that person ever, making it, whatever that is, being so slim, but that's not really the focus. And so many of my writers are usually people who come back with the experience of life. A lot of my students are younger, but so many are the ones who are 30, 40, 50, 60, even 70 and older, who come and say, I've always wanted to do this. I want to take this seriously. I want to focus on this craft. I want to move forward in the world without the kind of pressure of, this is what my job needs to be. This it's make it or break it as a writer for me. It's never that case. It's very rarely that case. And I think that that in some ways sums up the idea of that leap of faith that we all take. If I don't know how many. I imagine a lot of people in the audience have taken a liberal arts degree or in currently taking one. It's a bit of a leap of faith. It's saying, I have faith in myself and in my passions and my drive, and I'm not aiming for that kind of golden ring of, I'm going to be a computer programmer with IBM, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? It's saying, I'm jumping into this place that is scary, but it's also, what I need to do. And I think it's that passion that drives, and continues. That's why I don't think a liberal arts education is going anywhere either. There's too many people who are passionate who say, I don't necessarily fit the boxes you want to put me in. I want to do this, or this, and I'm going for it. And I know it's a very roundabout answer to the question, but that's what it is so many students, I've taught over the course of my relatively short, teaching life are the ones who are there they're there because they want to and have to be there, more than I'm just kind of playing with the idea or trying to figure something out.
Well, in fine arts, there must be kind of similar situations where you have people who are interested in plastic arts or dance or painting that don't necessarily, again, have the opportunity as young people to pursue those things, but find their way into the fine arts after.
Through other means, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's so interesting about a faculty of fine art, because in a way, we sort of have it all, in the sense that there are academic areas of art history, arts education, creative arts therapies that are really aligned with the humanities and the liberal arts. And then there are the performing arts, theater, music, dance. And then there are all the plastic arts, or sculptures, ceramics, photography, and so forth. So these students also intermix with each other, and many of them fluidly move between media, even though they may be specifically taking a degree or a program in one medium. But some students they know from a very early age that they can do nothing but this. I mean, this is their vocation. And then there are many folks who I think listen to the call of society or the call of their parents, and they do the proper degree, and they're an accountant and they're miserable, and yet they've always had this interest. They've made amateur films, or so there's a whole other group of people who actively finally give in, to their passion, and so you have these different cohorts mixing with one another and informing one another about their life choices. But what I would say is, no one takes those choices lightly. I mean, it's not you're not going to get rich. It's not about that kind of success. In some cases it may be, but as you were saying, Joseph, it's really, there's a sense that an intensity and a passion that is for your life is what's driving this decision, and it's almost bigger than you are. And I can't help but bring Aristotle back into the mix, because I discovered a few things when I was boning up and reading the Politics book 14 or something last night. At a certain point, he says, the liberal arts are about a sort of excellence and an idea of, he even struggles, is it an intellectual training, is it a moral training? But then he starts to talk about the idea of using one's mind well, but using leisure well. So he talks about work and being trained to be a full citizen in the world, but he also then talks about what it means to use your leisure time well. And I can't help but think that that's part of the liberal arts training, is to work one's mind, but then also to know how to use these slow times, how to then...
The unemployment of the...
that part too.
The lots and lots of leisure time you're facing as
Well, I was just thinking about what you were saying about this idea of going to your 9-to-5 job on a regular basis. I teach a South Asian literature class at Concordia here, and I always enjoy teaching Rohinton Mysteries, Such a Long Journey.
Yep.
Because of course that's a book that is about that very dilemma of the young student whose parents, Gustad in that novel, is very focused on his eldest son going to IIT, the Indian Institute for Technology, and having that kind of secure job as an engineer. And of course, the plot of that story revolves around the fact that the son doesn't want to do that. He wants to pursue the liberal arts. And this huge conflict erupts between father and son. And it's quite interesting that Rohinton Mystery wrote that novel, as I understand it, as he was working in a bank. So when he first came to Canada, I like to tell the students that, according to interviews, etc., that he thought he was going to be a folk singer. Oh my God. And Bob Dylan was one of his kind of idols, and he quickly realized that he wasn't going to make it as a folk singer, and so started writing. But he was working in the bank in the daytime, and of course the central character of that novel works in the bank, and there's all kinds of Mary Poppins subplots that are part of that novel. And of course, in the end, not only does the liberal arts become the choice of the son because it's what he wants to do, but it's the kind of communication skills, the kind of performance skills that the liberal arts gives you that allows the community to actually push back against kind of political fascism that's also an element of the story, protest, against the sort of the decay of infrastructure in the community and the lack of adequate social services. So we always have a very good discussion about how that kind of interest in the liberal arts is very multidimensional and has its utility, I guess.
Yeah.
It's funny, as you were saying, the decay of different things, and it's as much as I argue that the world is jumping ahead so quickly, it's still very much the same, with the political fascism and everything else where I'm living. And I guess that's what it takes, is to recognize that as we're jumping forward, some things are not changing, and
Well, we have a couple more minutes if we want to wrap up in a certain way, and then we would love to open it up to the audience for Q&A. Is there anything else that you want to share with us, Joseph? Any of your characters in your novels to come struggling with what degree they should take?
You're in the middle of wrapping up a novel, or you're at the end of wrapping up a novel.
The 16-year-old kid, the last thing on his mind is a liberal arts degree or not. But actually, that's what's going to save him. I just figured out the ending of the novel. This is great.
Just gave Joseph his ending. Fantastic.
Well, you were saying that you're involved in a number of different projects that are related to your novels, but that go beyond kind of the traditional activities that we would associate with the writer's life. What are some of the kind of things that you found yourself involved with that you didn't anticipate when you were thinking about pursuing writing full time?
Oh yeah, the journey has been, I've allowed myself to go places and take chances, and I guess, this is funny because it does directly relate to that leap of faith. Recently I wrote a ballet for the Royal Winnipeg Ballet.
Oh yes, yeah,
The
I've
Truth
heard.
and Reconciliation. Tina Keeper called me a few years ago, and this amazing Cree woman out west, and she said, "We'd like you to be in a ballet." And I was like, "You don't want to see me in tights, Tina." And she was like, no, we
said,
want
"No,
you to
not
write a
that part
ballet.
of the
We don't want you to be in it. And,
Yeah.
and I was like, a ballet? How do you write a ballet?
Yeah.
But I'd given myself the challenge a few years ago, if I'm going to continue to grow as an artist, as a person, I have to take challenges that are uncomfortable, but are exciting. And I said, okay. I hung up the phone with her saying, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Royal Winnipeg Ballet, let's do this. And I hang up and go, oh shit, what have I done now? And it's and so I this is the kind of leap of faith that I think my education prepared me for, is that I have to be agile. I have to take chances. And so I've tried to figure out what ballet was, and it took a long time. And I think it's, Royal Winnipeg Ballet took the story and have made something spectacular, I think, out of it. And a lot of people agree that they've made this beautiful. It's a collaborative effort too, and that's all part of it, this kind of education as well, as you just don't always work alone. You're working with others who are like-minded, and let's make something work well. That's one example of this kind of desire to push and move forward and to take chances and to try to create something. And I could have very easily fallen flat on my butt with this one,
No, I'm sure no one would let you do that.
Thankfully it did. I don't think it did at all, but
But it's interesting too, using your art to discover another art. I mean, how is it that one marries narrative form, fiction, nonfiction, research, history, with dance, with movement, with lighting, with sound? I mean, this kind of challenge of having to open yourself up to another world cracks open your world in a way that you never expected.
Hugely, yeah. It was amazing. It was amazing, very scary. At one point, I was like, do I pull out of this project? Is it really going in the direction I don't want it to? And I was like, no, I'm not giving up on this. It's that idea of learning and having to acclimate to so many different situations and people who speak in different ways than you do.
Right.
But this is all, this has been my training all my life through what I've decided to do, through, again, that kind of education is, I'm going to jump into this and I will learn the language. I will learn your language as best I can. I hope you'll learn mine. We'll figure out, and we'll move forward in a really, in a kind of cool way.
And I was going to say there's a kind of interdisciplinarity that requires. And again, I was thinking about our conversation earlier, thinking about this conversation tonight, how liberal arts is really the place where interdisciplinarity begins. And obviously that's like a huge element of the way in which universities are re-examining their curriculum and their research practices. And your description of how you feel embarking on this project with the ballet is interesting to me, because in terms of my own research, I find I'm also being pushed in new interdisciplinary directions all the time. And sometimes I have the exact same experience where someone who knows, about my interest in the environmental humanities calls me up and says, I'm working on this project and I think that your insight on that could really be helpful. And of course I can see the connection, but it's not one that I ever expected. And then I often hang up the phone and say, what did I just agree to? But
it's those challenges are what drive us.
Yeah.
But it's also the confidence to be able to think interdisciplinarily and learn to communicate and the languages of other disciplines and
I think being open to miscommunications. I mean, that's the other thing we haven't really talked about is failure and the openness to misunderstandings and miscommunications and slight failures and crisis moments, and to know that that's not the end. I mean, we always feel that moment, and you have to push yourself on through numerous times on a number of projects.
Graduates know anything, it's failure.
It's failure. And it's how to fail beautifully. We're beautiful failures. Yeah, and I think particularly what I hear from a lot of the younger generation is that they they find failure very difficult because they've been surrounded by people who've never let them fail. Yep. Everything's going to be fine.
But the thing is, too, it's if you, and I'm not knocking any choice of any graduate or choice of degree, but if you are always doing the thing you know you're good at, and you know what the answer is going to be, and you know that it's going to be A to B, that's great. But there's nothing like that kind of, again, that leap of faith, which I think ultimately is what pursuing something like that kind of degree is.
Yeah, that's kind of frisson, and in a way, maybe we can sort of come full circle to talk about life as a trapeze artist and a contortionist. Is really it's that the knowing that somebody is going to catch you, that you're going to have to let go of that bar. You're going to be moving in space, and there's got to be that end point that of survival, literally. And I
keeping that day job.
Keeping that day job. Wonderful.
Well, also just being able. It's not even so much about failing, but experimenting.
Yeah. And knowing that that's part of
being able to
be a part of it.
Try different things. And do it in a context where you have a community of scholars or artists who can give you tips and act as a coach so that you can move in new directions. Again, not completely on your own, but with guidance from others.
And maybe with that, we'll take some guidance from all of you out in the audience and open the floor up for some questions. I think we'll raise the house lights. There are 2 microphones, and this is being recorded, so please do step up to the mic. Thank you.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for an interesting panel. But I think you forgot to mention that the liberal arts is a buffer against the marketplace that the powers that be want to be the end of all. The marketplace rules the world, and we have to expose everything we do to the needs of the market. Today, actually, the provincial government is going to have a new law, legislate so that only immigrants who serve the interests of companies will be allowed to come in. So you can see how we need desperately liberal arts because they teach us how to think, and it's the wisdom of the ages in there, whether it's philosophy or literature, or there is wisdom in what we learn, and it teaches us to be critical thinkers. And I think it shouldn't be just for liberal arts students. It should be spread out into the Molson School of Business and into engineering, so that they can understand that sexual harassment is not a good thing. It's not it's only by exposing students to a liberal arts education that you can begin to understand what it is to be a decent human being before anything else.
Yeah.
I might just jump in and say that the article by Marilyn Robinson in Harper's this month is very much focused on that point of how kind of liberal arts education can defamiliarize all of this rhetoric of the market and be a source of critique for that hegemony of that kind of thinking. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you all very much. Can you hear me? I noticed that you didn't discuss technology, and I'm just wondering if you could say something about the sort of fairly widespread push toward online delivery of courses and so on, and how that impacts the liberal arts.
Joseph is teaching in a program right now. And
I was one of the early, I think, teachers in an online writing workshop environment, which was fascinating. I think my first class I taught was in 1990, so it was a long time ago. And at first I was like, there's no way this is going to work. How do you teach something like creative writing to a graduate student online. It doesn't make any sense to me, And then I realized, it makes perfect sense because there's a small group of students, and all we're doing is reading and commenting on each other's work, just like we used to do in the old days before computers, kind of thing. Marking on the manuscript, albeit it is digital. But I think that we have to move forward that way. Even in Canada, with all of the isolated northern communities, why we've not been pursuing much more of a low residency, as I call it, style of teaching when we have all the technology. It's a bit confounding, but I think it's a huge part of the future, and it's going to continue to be. And there are, and it's not perfect by any means. There's all different types of classes that fail because they just aren't made for that kind of distance learning. But very specifically, I speak about, because that's the one thing I do know, is the distance learning. But I do know what works as well, or I've watched what works really interestingly. And it's not forcing, again, it's not forcing the student to have to come to you, whether it's hundreds or thousands of kilometers. It's the virtual classroom, which is, again, this is one of the positive aspects of where we're going as technologically.
I might add, in the English department, we're experimenting with a new course on Old English taught via Tolkien. And in fact, my colleague, Dr. Stephen Yeager, who is been developing that course over the last year, came to me when I was chair of the department with the idea for the course. And the thing that really convinced me that it would be a great idea is that he argued that many of the language training skills that were involved in teaching Old English could be done much more efficiently in the online format, and then free up time for the kinds of discussions that you would normally like to do in a liberal arts setting. And again, we see that online course as a way of, again, giving students quick access to Old English training, and then be able to draw them into more conventional classes within our curriculum that have nothing to do with online training. So I think that one has to approach the use of technology in education in ways that are, specific to the pedagogical needs of the course, and that's, I think, the approach that we're taking, at least in the English department.
Which is sometimes the challenge, is to keep pedagogy at the forefront of the design, of the course design and online learning, and particularly when you get into things like MOOCs and so on, like how, as these options grow larger and larger, how do we keep pedagogy in the forefront of the design? Yeah, and again, it was because pedagogy was at the center of the discussion for the rationale for the course, that I was really convinced it was a good idea, as were the rest of my colleagues who are, like most humanities scholars, perhaps not as technologically astute as your average engineering professor, and yet they saw the value of the course.
Wonderful.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for the conversation. I'd love to take the Tolkien class. You guys have been talking about the liberal arts as this exploratory endeavor, that you explore your interests, and it's rooted on freedom. But the liberal arts is also rooted on this 5,000 plus year old tradition of people doing just this, talking about ideas and writing about these ideas. And in many ways, that's basically, a lot of what the liberal arts is. And many of these ideas and many of these people nowadays seem to be under attack or undervalued by, this modern world, by many things. So my question to you is, how do you see, what is the role of this tradition in the current iteration of the liberal arts, and how does the liberal artist or the liberal arts practitioner, I don't know what the term is, should relate to this tradition? Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. I think that it was the first three subjects in the liberal arts were grammar, rhetoric, and dialectics. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any of us teach a course that's called dialectics anymore, but maybe we should. But it's a very important question. And I think how we're feeling it very often is trying to build curricular and paracurricular opportunities for this kind of intense dialogic mode to be enacted. So that's not only within the classroom, but something that we're struggling with all the time is how do we bring such a large constituency of people together? Or how do we make small spaces for people to engage in conversation? How do we have unscripted moments of interchange where we can have intense, politicized, dangerous conversations where we, in a community that is respectful and is trustful, how can we allow ourselves to sort of go to the far edges of conversation and dialogue, mm-hmm. And to have that be mutually informing and mutually energizing? So I think it is a big question of pedagogically making sure that we're thinking about sort of classroom situations and the training in liberal arts, but also to allow for just the opposite, and that's for creating other kinds of social, cultural, political, and aesthetic spaces for us to have these kinds of rhetorical and dialectical conversations with one another.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, we have a very fine liberal arts college here at Concordia, and it's always been my experience in the English department that these students bring very important perspectives into the classroom, into the rest of the university. One of the great things about the liberal arts undergraduate program here is that you can enroll in that program as well as major in another area of the university. So we have many liberal arts students that are in the English department taking our courses. And I teach post-colonial studies, so we're often sort of looking at writers who are sort of critiquing the Western tradition, mm-hmm. And aspects of European culture that were imposed on them as a result of colonialism. But you have to know what are the dimensions of that history? What are the details of the cultural attitudes and practices? What is the literature that is valued within that tradition and has been part of the colonial classroom as well. So bringing that kind of expertise into discussions is essential, I think. So there's always a space for that kind of more traditional liberal arts training.
Absolutely. And I look at it quite similarly but differently too, as graduating from a liberal arts program is like joining a biker gang. You could be walking down the street and the guy that walked by you or the woman who walked by you, you're like, oh yeah, you're one of us too. Yeah, we're one of the 1%ers, but you know what? All of them can make fun of us and everything else. But like you said, we got 5,000 years of history holding us up and pushing us forward, and this is it's something to be proud of, I think. Even that the word liberal is in it, it's great. Especially in the States right now, I graduate from liberal arts, not conservative arts. That's liberal arts.
Super. Yeah, it's another question.
I'd like you to share your thoughts about the whole importance of a general arts curriculum. One of the reasons why we all share this liberal arts experience here together, I'm sure, is because we've had courses or exposure to certain general arts and humanity courses, which no longer are a requirement. So whether it's a marketplace or whether it's where all the research dollars go, I don't know how many, what are the research dollars in philosophy or even in studio arts? You see what I'm saying? Like, I think that there's a hierarchy of how knowledge is even treated. And I'm concerned about the equality of knowledge, and that all knowledge is valuable, and I'm concerned that in that Aristotle excellent sense of the word, that we are graduating students who are never exposed to poetry, that are never exposed to fine arts, that are never exposed to philosophy or humanities or another language. When I went to university, studying a language was part of the liberal arts tradition. So I just want you to share your thoughts about this modern culture we're in, of which there are a lot of positive things. I don't want to reject technology or any, but there is a dilemma with the modernity, the marketplace, where research dollars are, and the hierarchy of knowledge.
It doesn't start at university, it starts right back in grade school. Cutting of, as we talked about, the physical and the musical and the full person, gym classes, music classes. Those are all taking a back seat to, there's a real movement I've watched really kind of force feeding us into certain, you're this, or this, right? And this is all that's important, and the rest of it doesn't matter anymore. And we're going to suffer greatly, I think, as a culture and as a people, by not turning that around. But how do we do it? We're the ones who are the graduates who continue to push to say, guess what? Art is a cornerstone of what this country is, of what this culture is, of who we are as a people. That's what if I was to sit down and write a book thinking that, I would never write a page. But when I'm well into something, I'm like, this is important. What I'm saying in this small way is really important, and it'll be listened to, I hope, as much as another medium will be, or another area of focus or study in this country. And that's something we have to remember. It's up to us, the individuals, to keep pushing that. We could complain and bitch and moan and say, oh, everything's changed, but we got to do what we have to do to continue to push forward our own understanding of what the agenda should be, and how do we push it forward. And it's as simple as talking with people like us meeting tonight. This is fantastic that people are interested enough to gather, on a early March night in Montreal to discuss something that we all obviously find is really, really vital to who we are as a nation and a people and as individuals. And it begins right here in the grassroots and saying, we're going to be part of this agenda, and this is part of the agenda is this idea that we need a full rounded education, not just for us, but for our children as well.
I think that's a beautiful place to...
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this issue of required courses, and I guess I'm of two minds about it. I suppose it's a really good thing for students who, because of this market pressure that they enter into the university with, might feel like they can't afford, we got this language of economics all the time, they can't afford to take a class in English, or they can't afford to take a class in philosophy.
Time-wise as well, right?
Yes, because they have to try and complete their degrees as quickly as possible in order to reduce the size of their student loans, etc. Again, I feel quite lucky to live in Quebec because of the tuition fees being much more reasonable in that respect. So if there is that required course, then that becomes an opportunity for a student to explore something that they might not otherwise be tempted to explore. On the other hand, you don't want students sitting in classes that they resent being in. And it's interesting, I'm thinking about this push within some Canadian universities for making a First Nations studies class a requirement, especially in the wake of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and really I think what is genuinely a need for Canadians to be much more aware of the history of colonialism in Canada and its impact on First Nations communities. But I've also heard First Nation scholars and students speak out against the idea of a required course because they don't want students who are antagonistic to that pedagogical project being required to be in a class. And they're more in favor of actually pushing different departments and disciplines to integrate these kind of more interdisciplinary approaches into their classroom, like in the business school, et cetera.
Well, I think I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm so sorry. Excellent questions. There's no way that we can wrap up a conversation like this, but I think a few things that have emerged are really, it's up to many of us to continue being very strong about the importance and the significance of liberal arts, of really broadening and deepening and understanding the place for this kind of education, both within our schools, but also within the cultural milieu in general, and the political and the aesthetic and all of these other realms in which we reside, that the power of the mind, the body, the spirit is so significant, even more so now than maybe ever before. So thank you, Joseph, so much. Thank you, Jill.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all of you
Thanks.
for joining us.
Yeah,
Have a
Thank
good
you
evening.
for the questions.